Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and felt a force there, something deeper than affection, something almost ancient, pulling at you, watching you, even consuming you? This isn't just romance. It's not love in the way you've been taught to understand it. It's archetypal, and if you're not careful, it will destroy you before you even know what happened. Carl Jung warned us, love is never just personal. It is myth, it is projection, it is the battlefield of the unconscious. And nowhere is this more true than in the unspoken power of the shadow feminine. You think you're in a relationship with a woman, but often you're in a relationship with her father wound, with her unmet masculine, with the devouring mother energy that hides behind her affection. And she doesn't even know it. That's the terrifying part. Neither of you see what's really playing out until it's too late. If you've ever felt like you were being smothered by someone's love, if you've ever felt consumed, not cherished, this is why. If you've ever been idealized and then discarded, replaced without warning, you've tasted this archetypal poison. Today, we're going deep into the psychological abyss of feminine desire and power, where control wears the mask of care, and where love becomes a form of domination. We're talking about the shadow great mother, the Animus, and the Adult Electra Complex. Three forces that shape countless romantic dynamics. But no one talks about them, because they live beneath the surface, in dreams, in projections, in the unconscious motives we refuse to see in ourselves. Let's start with the shadow great mother, one of Jung's most haunting insights. She is not the nurturing mother, she is the consuming one. She gives, but only to control. She loves, but only to bind. This is the part of the feminine psyche that disguises domination as care. And you'll feel it when someone showers you with affection, but every gift comes with a string. Every moment of closeness carries a silent command. Don't leave. Don't change. Don't grow beyond me. Jung described her as the terrible mother, not terrible as in incompetent, but terrible as in powerful, as in mythological. Think of the Greek goddess Hecate or Kali, or even the mother from fairy tales who devours her children in the name of love. This archetype lives in the unconscious of both men and women, but when it shows up in women's relationships, it often emerges through emotional possession. You'll see it in women who become fixated on their partner's every move, who interpret autonomy as betrayal, who give endlessly but erupt in rage when it's not returned exactly how they imagined. This is not personal insecurity, this is archetypal shadow, the kind of energy that suffocates rather than nurtures, that confuses engulfment with intimacy. If you're a man caught in this dynamic, you'll feel it immediately. The relationship starts with warmth, intensity even. She makes you feel like the center of her world, but soon that attention becomes surveillance, that love becomes expectation. You feel yourself shrinking, molding, silencing, and still it's never enough. That's the trap. The more you give, the more it devours. But this isn't about blame. That woman doesn't even realize what's happening. She believes she's loving you. She doesn't see that her unconscious is using you to replay the archetype of the devouring mother, because she hasn't yet made that force conscious within herself. Now let's talk about animus possession, one of the most misunderstood concepts in Jungian psychology. Every woman carries an inner masculine energy, just as every man carries an inner feminine, the anima. Women are born with a psychic counterpart, the animus. When integrated, this inner masculine provides strength, logic, direction, but when it's unconscious and unexamined, it becomes a tyrant, a voice in her head that moralizes, dominates and judges. Worse, it begins to project itself onto men. Here's how you'll know it's happening. She doesn't see you as you are. She sees you as the embodiment of her own inner masculine ideals, or worse, her resentments. You're either a god, a failure, or an enemy. There is no middle ground, and no matter what you do, you're being compared to a fantasy she can't articulate, a blueprint of what a real man is supposed to be. Jung said that when a woman is possessed by her animus, she speaks with false certainty, she moralizes without reflection, she becomes emotionally rigid, often insisting she's right even when she's not listening. You'll feel like you're arguing with something ancient, something impersonal, because you are. The animus is not her, it's a psychic force using her. And again, she doesn't know. That's the haunting part. This isn't conscious manipulation, this is the unconscious at work. Finally, we come to the Adult Electra Complex, the continuation of a child's unresolved love and rivalry toward her father. In psychoanalytic theory, the Electra Complex describes a daughter's early desire for her father and competition with her mother. But what happens when those dynamics are never resolved? They mature, they evolve, and they begin to haunt her adult romantic life. You'll see this in women who idealize emotionally unavailable men, who seek power dynamics in love, who recreate the emotional terrain of their childhood over and over again without knowing why. Sometimes this means she's drawn to men who mirror her father's emotional distance. Other times she becomes the one in power, unconsciously reversing the roles. But in both cases, the relationship isn't really about you. It's about the unfinished story she's still trying to resolve. You become the father figure she wants to conquer, or the one she wants to heal. And when you don't play your role, she turns cold, distant, even cruel, because you've broken the unconscious spell. This isn't about blaming women, it's about seeing clearly. These are not personality flaws. These are mythic patterns, archetypal energies, and they affect men too. Differently, but just as profoundly. Because here's the truth, we are all unconscious until we choose to see. We are all puppets until we take back the strings. So if you've ever wondered why your relationships feel like psychological minefields, if you've ever felt yourself drawn in, devoured and discarded, if you've ever sensed that love was being used to control you, you're not crazy. You're seeing the shadow. And the only way out is in. You might be tempted to think this is all just bad luck, like you keep ending up with the wrong people, the toxic ones, the emotionally unavailable ones. But Jung would ask you to look deeper. He would say, what inside you is attracting these dynamics? What unconscious part of you needs this pattern in order to see itself? Because archetypes don't just act through others, they act through you. If you are repeatedly drawn to women who possess this shadow feminine force, you're not just a victim of their psyche, you're also under the influence of your own unconscious story, and often that story is shaped by your own early relationships, with your mother, with women, and with your own disowned anima. Yes, Jung said that every man carries an inner feminine, and if that inner feminine is underdeveloped, if you've never faced your own projections, your own emotional shadows, then you become the perfect canvas for someone else's unresolved archetypes to play out. You become the stage, the actor, the sacrifice. This is where things get brutally honest, because many men secretly long to be consumed, to be adored, to be chosen by a woman who seems larger than life. It flatters the ego, it feels like power, but it's not real connection. It's fusion. It's projection. It's the merging of two incomplete psyches trying to become whole through each other without ever doing the real work of individuation. And that's where the war begins. Because no one can save you from yourself, and no one can complete you, not even the most intoxicating woman, especially not her. Because the moment you make someone else responsible for your inner wholeness, you give away your soul, you abandon your selfhood, and the relationship becomes a battlefield of unconscious needs, manipulations, and unmet archetypal demands. You'll know this is happening when the dynamic swings between extremes. One day she's nurturing, intoxicating, the source of your joy. The next day she's cold, accusatory, distant, and you're left wondering what you did wrong. That's not just mood, That's the Animus and the devouring mother taking turns. She might say she wants closeness, but then punishes you for getting too close. She might say she craves honesty, but lashes out the moment you share something real. You'll start to walk on eggshells. You'll begin to edit yourself. You'll confuse peace with silence. That's the sign you're in the web. And if you're not careful, you'll lose your center entirely. But here's the most dangerous part of all. When these dynamics go unexamined, they can feel like love. They feel intense, magnetic, fated, and they are. But not in the way you think. They're fated because your unconscious wants to be seen. And it will keep casting the same characters, setting the same stage, repeating the same story until you wake up. This is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So, how do you break free? Not by blaming her, not by labeling her as toxic or broken or manipulative. That's just another projection, another way of avoiding your own reflection. The truth is, she's just as trapped as you are. Both of you are dancing with invisible forces, archetypes that began long before either of you were born. You break free by seeing the pattern, by naming it, by refusing to play your assigned role in the unconscious script. And that takes strength, it takes clarity, but most of all, it takes shadow work. You have to ask yourself, why did I want to be consumed? Why did I ignore the red flags? Why did I stay when I felt my soul shrinking? What part of me believed this was love? Because somewhere inside there's a part of you that needed this experience to wake up, to feel the pain, to finally say no more. That's when the individuation process begins, the real journey, the one Jung called the path of wholeness. And it's not pretty. It doesn't look like spiritual enlightenment or perfect boundaries or some new age concept of divine love. It looks like grief, like clarity, like walking away from the fantasy of completion and finally facing your own inner chaos. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop needing someone to complete you is the moment you become truly capable of love. Because now you're not projecting. You're not idealizing. You're not manipulating or being manipulated. You're present, whole, awake. And when two people meet in that state, not to fill a void, but to overflow, that's where something sacred can emerge. Not fantasy, not fusion, but real connection, real intimacy. But to get there, you have to be willing to look at what lives beneath your relationships. You have to see the shadow feminine, not just in others, but in yourself. You have to recognize the part of you that plays victim to archetypes you refuse to name, and then you have to take your soul back. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Every archetype that controls you is one you haven't integrated. And integration doesn't mean killing the archetype. It means becoming conscious of it, owning it, seeing how it lives in you, not just in your partner. Yes, you may have dated women who were possessed by the Animus. Yes, you may have felt the grip of the devouring mother in your last relationship. Yes, you may have been cast as the father figure in a grown woman's unresolved Electra fantasy. But the only way to stop repeating that pattern is to ask, why did I accept that role? Bond because some part of you wanted it, some part of you needed to play that part, to understand who you are. And now you do. Now you can say no. Now you can choose differently, but only if you're honest enough to face your shadow. Only if you're brave enough to walk away from the archetype and into yourself. When you stop playing your role in someone else's unconscious narrative, something profound happens. The entire structure of the relationship begins to shift. Because it was never built on truth, it was built on mutual projection. On psychological contracts neither of you knew you signed. And when you break that contract, you're not just leaving a relationship, you're dismantling an illusion. But that illusion was comfortable, wasn't it? It was seductive, to feel needed, to be the center of someone's world, to be the one who could save, protect, fix. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe you liked being the one who was saved, who was chased, who felt adored without having to truly show yourself. Either way, it wasn't love. It was possession disguised as passion. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's why so many people go back, not because it's good, but because it's familiar. Because the moment they step outside of the archetypal dynamic, they feel lost, unstable, like a piece of their identity has been ripped away. And in a way it has, because when your sense of self is built around unconscious patterns, healing feels like death. Jung knew this. He called it the death of the ego, the necessary collapse that precedes individuation. The truth is, healing your relationship to the shadow feminine doesn't start with understanding women. It starts with understanding yourself. With recognizing the part of you that allowed the fantasy to persist, that turned a blind eye, that accepted emotional control because it felt like love. And maybe you had no example of real intimacy. Maybe all you ever saw was enmeshment, codependency, domination. Maybe your first model of love was a mother who overgave, overcorrected, overfunctioned, and a father who withdrew, disappeared, or demanded respect without giving love. If that's what you grew up with, then of course you'd be drawn to women who feel like emotional extremes. Of course stability would feel boring. Of course boundaries would feel like abandonment. This is why we repeat what we don't repair. Because the psyche is always seeking wholeness. It doesn't care if the pattern is painful. It only cares that it's familiar, and that familiarity, no matter how destructive, feels like home. Until you wake up, until you say, I will not play this game anymore. That's when you begin to pull the projections back in. That's where the work begins. Not with blame, but with integration. Integration means facing the part of you that likes the drama, the emotional highs and lows, the psychological chaos. It means admitting that you found power in being needed, or comfort in being controlled. It means owning your own animus, your own inner voice that dominates, critiques, moralizes, and asking, how do I project this onto women? Because men carry projections too, and just like women project the animus, men project the anima, the inner feminine. And if you've never met her inside yourself, you will search for her in every woman you meet. You will chase her shadow, confuse her beauty for truth, her chaos for depth. And when she doesn't match your unconscious fantasy, you'll feel betrayed, not because she failed you, but because you never saw her in the first place. You saw your own projection. This is why individuation is essential, because without it, every relationship becomes a stage, a psychological play, a battle of unresolved archetypes. And love, true love, can't exist in that theater. Only illusion, only role-playing, only shadows pretending to be whole. So what does real integration look like? It looks like seeing the shadow great mother and refusing to engage. It looks like loving someone without letting them consume you. It looks like hearing the animus voice, whether it's yours or hers, and not reacting to it. Just observing. Just holding your ground. It looks like refusing to become someone's father or savior or scapegoat. It looks like walking away from the Electra dynamic with compassion, not resentment. Because you see what's happening now. You know this isn't about you. It never was. And yet, ironically, it is, because every relationship you've had has been a mirror. Every woman you were drawn to was showing you something about yourself, your own unmet needs, your own hidden wounds, your own inner feminine, distorted or denied. And now, with clarity, you can begin the real work. You can stop seeking women to fix you, break you, or save you. You can meet the anima within. You can build a relationship with your own soul, with your own psyche. And when you do, you won't need women to play those roles anymore. That's when everything changes. Because now, You're not looking for a goddess. You're not drawn to chaos or control or intensity for its own sake. You're looking for presence, wholeness, mutual recognition. You're looking for someone who's done their own shadow work, who doesn't need to dominate you or idealize you or recreate daddy issues through romantic tension. You're looking for a woman, not a wounded girl disguised as a siren. And you won't settle for less, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, out of loyalty to your soul. This is the quiet power of the man who has faced the shadow feminine, not by fighting her, but by integrating his own. He no longer fears emotional storms. He doesn't chase or rescue or react. He simply sees. And because he sees, he's free. He doesn't attract drama, he disarms it with his presence. He doesn't beg for love, he embodies it. And in that state, only a woman who has faced her own darkness will be able to meet him, not as a fantasy, not as a father, but as an equal. That's where real intimacy begins. That's where the archetypes stop controlling the relationship and start informing it. Because archetypes are not the enemy. They're the language of the soul. They're maps. And when you become conscious of them, they stop being prisons and start becoming portals. Portals to depth, to truth, to love that isn't about control, projection, or possession, but about mutual awakening. And that is what the shadow feminine ultimately teaches you. Not just how to survive her, but how to see her, how to understand the myth beneath the madness, how to stop blaming the woman in front of you for the archetype inside her, and instead begin your own transformation. Because until you do, you're just another actor, another puppet, another casualty of a war you never even realized you were fighting. There's a kind of mourning that happens when you finally see through the archetype, when you look back on past relationships and realize they were never truly about love. They were about unconscious need, unresolved trauma, and the desperate longing to become whole through another person. That realization can shatter you, but it's also what sets you free. Because for the first time, you're not just reacting, you're not just falling into roles. You're watching. You're aware. You see the signs now. You recognize the energy behind the behavior. And that awareness gives you a kind of power, not over others, but over yourself, over your choices, over the stories you're willing to participate in. You stop romanticizing emotional chaos. You stop mistaking control for care. You stop assuming that love should feel like a roller coaster, like an addiction, like a high followed by an inevitable crash. You understand that those feelings are often the byproduct of archetypal possession, not passion. And you begin to make different choices. You start valuing stability over seduction, honesty over performance, silence over noise. You start asking deeper questions, not just, do I want her, but why? Not just, is she attracted to me, but what part of her psyche is doing the attracting? And most importantly, what part of me is responding? This is where the real work begins, not in the intensity of falling, but in the discipline of staying awake. It's not glamorous, it's not romantic in the conventional sense, but it's the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for anyone you choose to walk with. Jung taught that the unconscious seeks consciousness, that the psyche left to its own devices will create experiences that force you to wake up. That's what these relationships are. They're not accidents, they're not curses, they are invitations to see, to feel, to transform. But most people miss the invitation. They blame the other person, they repeat the pattern, they say things like, all women are the same, or I can't trust anyone. They collapse into cynicism because it's easier than self-confrontation. But if you're still listening, you're not most people. You're ready to look deeper. So let's go there. Let's talk about what it really means to meet the shadow feminine within yourself. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean submitting to chaos or accepting emotional abuse. It means recognizing that the feminine, just like the masculine, has a light side and a dark side, and both live in you, regardless of your gender. The shadow feminine in men can appear as emotional neediness disguised as sensitivity, as passive aggression dressed up as compassion, as a deep desire to be consumed, to disappear into the other, to find meaning through fusion. It can look like weakness, but it's not. It's unconscious femininity, longing for integration. And when you suppress this inner feminine, you become either rigid or reactive. You either shut down emotionally, or you become overwhelmed by feelings you don't understand. You either dominate or submit. There is no balance, no inner union, and so you seek it outside of yourself. But no woman can give you what you have not yet claimed within. This is why the man who has met his inner feminine, who has done the shadow work, who has faced his own projections, becomes magnetic in a way that has nothing to do with charm. His presence doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it holds, it listens, it penetrates, not through force, but through stillness. He doesn't need to dominate to feel powerful. He doesn't need to disappear into a woman to feel loved. He stands in his own center, and from that center he chooses, not out of fear, not out of trauma, but out of wholeness. And here's what's fascinating. When a man like this enters a woman's life, something begins to shift in her too, because he's not playing the expected role. He's not reacting to her projections. He's not performing for her animus. And in that unexpected stillness, she is forced to confront herself. This is how transformation happens in relationship, not through fixing, not through rescuing, but through presence, through refusal to play unconscious games, through the quiet insistence on authenticity. But be warned, this path is not for the faint of heart. Because when you stop feeding the archetype, when you stop playing your role in the old dynamic, people will resist. They will accuse. They will try to provoke you back into the story. Because your awakening disturbs the system. It threatens the illusion. You may be called cold, distant, arrogant. You may be told you're not trying hard enough, not opening up, not doing your part. But don't let that pull you back in. That's not love talking. That's the archetype trying to survive. Your job isn't to convince anyone of your growth. It's to live it, quietly, steadily, with clarity. And yes, it will be lonely at times, because once you stop playing the old game, you'll realize how many people are still invested in it, how many relationships were built on mutual blindness, how many connections only existed because of shared projections. But that loneliness won't last forever, because the clearer you become, the more you attract others who are also awake, who don't need you to save them, who don't want to be saved, who have met their own shadow, made peace with it, and now walk in truth. That's the reward for doing this work, not just healthier relationships, but freedom, emotional sovereignty, the ability to love without losing yourself, to be chosen without being consumed, to care deeply without collapsing into chaos. And perhaps most importantly, to finally understand what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Because who you truly are is not a role, not a projection, not a rescuer, not a victim, not a hero in someone else's myth. You are a soul waking up. And now that you see, you can never go back to sleep. There's a quiet revolution that begins the moment you refuse to be cast in someone else's unconscious drama. And it doesn't start with confrontation, it starts with clarity, with knowing your boundaries, not just the lines you won't let others cross, but the emotional territory within yourself that you're no longer willing to abandon. That's what Jungian psychology ultimately teaches us, that freedom isn't the absence of pain or conflict, it's the presence of awareness. It's the power to choose who you become instead of letting your unconscious patterns run your life. And in the realm of relationships, that means stepping off the stage, No more roles, no more scripts, no more performing love while quietly bleeding inside. You don't need to be the rescuer. You don't need to be the container for someone else's unintegrated pain. You don't need to carry a dynamic that doesn't even belong to you. Instead, you bring presence, you bring truth, you bring the kind of love that doesn't seduce, possess, or manipulate, but sees. And when you bring that, you'll know instantly whether the person in front of you can meet you there or not. You'll feel it in how they respond to your silence, in how they react when you don't play the role they've written for you, in whether they lean in with curiosity or pull back with blame. And that response will tell you everything. Because when someone is still possessed by the shadow, when the devouring mother or the animus or the Electra wound is running the show, they won't know what to do with your presence. Your refusal to react will be unsettling. Your calm will feel like rejection. Your clarity will feel like cruelty. But none of that is about you. It's about what you represent. You're not feeding the archetype, you're not submitting to it, you're not validating it through unconscious behavior, and that forces the other person to either face their own inner world or walk away. And here's the hardest part. You have to let them. You have to release the fantasy that you can love someone into wholeness. You can't. No one can. That's not your job. Your job is to become whole within yourself and then invite others into that wholeness, not carry them to it. That's what it means to love consciously, to love without losing yourself, to love without collapsing into projection or myth. It means recognizing the divine within someone, but refusing to worship their shadow. It means honoring their humanity while holding on to your own. This is why shadow work is not just about healing old wounds. It's about becoming unshakable in your own psyche, so that no matter who walks into your life, you remain intact, you remain present, you remain you. And that's terrifying for people who have only ever known love as fusion, who have only ever known connection as control, who think closeness means ownership. But for those who are ready, it's liberation. So let's return to the core message. Understanding female desire and power requires going beyond the surface, beyond the persona, beyond what's said and done. It requires looking at the unconscious forces that drive behavior, the archetypes that live beneath every choice, every conflict, every romantic high and low. Because when a woman is consumed by the shadow great mother, she doesn't want a partner, she wants a child, someone to absorb, to control, to bind with emotional strings masked as nurturing. When she's possessed by the animus, she doesn't see her lover, she sees a projection, a mental construct, a man she can argue with, dominate or idealize depending on the fantasy her unconscious is replaying. And when the Electra complex is still active in her psyche, she isn't falling in love, she's trying to resolve something unfinished with her father. And you, whether you realize it or not, are just the stand-in. But she's not the villain, she's not broken, she's not evil, she's simply unconscious, just like you were before you saw the pattern. She's lost in the same psychic fog, and the most compassionate thing you can do is not join her in that fog, but stand firm in the light. Because that's what breaks the cycle. That's what brings shadow to consciousness, not judgment, not superiority, but stillness. Presence, the refusal to collapse. And yes, that choice will cost you. It will cost you false peace. It will cost you relationships built on roles and projection. It will cost you the addictive highs of codependent passion. But what you get in return is something real, something sacred. You get yourself, and from there, everything changes. You'll stop needing to be understood. You'll stop chasing closure. You'll stop trying to rewrite the past through the people in your present. You'll stop making others the carriers of your unmet needs. Instead, you'll meet yourself in the places you've been avoiding. You'll integrate the parts of you that were once dependent, reactive, overgiving, and you'll stop bleeding into relationships that were never meant to hold your full truth. And when that happens, The shadow feminine loses her grip, not because she disappears, but because you no longer fear her. You've seen her, named her, integrated her, and now she serves you. She becomes intuition, sensitivity, fierce protection, passion with boundaries, emotional depth without manipulation, love that is wild, yes, but conscious. This is the power of psychological integration. It doesn't destroy the archetype, it elevates it. It brings light into the darkness and transforms chaos into wisdom. And that's what this whole journey has been about. Not just surviving the archetypes, but learning their language, reading their patterns, and using that knowledge to reclaim your life. So if you've ever felt lost in love, if you've ever been consumed by someone's affection, or reduced to a role in their unconscious drama, if you've ever questioned your own sanity because the relationship made no sense on the surface, now you know why. It wasn't just personal, it was archetypal, and now you're free. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You've seen the myth, you've named the shadow, and you've taken back the only thing that ever truly mattered. The message from the God tries to tell us, don't forget, warns those who are yourself.